Welcome to Smoky Mountain Source, and today we're going to be talking about Appalachian Salt. A little less than 500 million years ago, the Appalachians were beginning to form as the Earth's crust was in a tumultuous state. After crashing and receding over these hundreds of millions of years, the Appalachian Mountains formed. Interestingly, before the formation of the Appalachian Mountains, the entire region was covered by an expansive sea. This sea eventually drained from the valleys many Appalachians live in today after the mountains were formed. What has been left over from the ancient sea are the minerals that once filled the sea. Appalachian salt, one mineral left over from this sea, is being used in the modern world today. The recorded history of Appalachian salt in the Kanawha River begins with Native Americans. During the 1770s, the natives were showing European prospectors where they got their salt from and how they made it. These prospectors were given free rein in the region as various military engagements had opened the area to settlers for the first time. Once the settlers learned of the Shawnee Indians' way of making salt from the banks of the Kanawha River, they set to work. Almost immediately, the first salt furnace was built in 1797 by Elisha Brooks. At the time, salt had to be purchased from overseas and imported into the New World. So once settlers became wise to this new avenue of salt production, the industry boomed. Everyone from Cincinnati to New Orleans was getting their curing salt from this new source on the Kanawha River. The salt industry spawned a boom of other industries as well, including boat building, carpentry, and manufacturing barrels. Unfortunately, as was the case in many industries in the young New World, the salt industry began importing slaves to build their fortunes. In 1808, the Ruffners installed the first brine water well. They had drilled to a depth of almost 60 feet, which led to more efficient salt production. Eventually, they drilled even deeper to 410 feet, which set off a domino effect. Up to 52 salt furnaces were in operation directly after the Ruffners' findings. In 1817, the original Dickinson in the area, from which J.Q. Dickinson would spawn, officially became the largest salt manufacturer in the region. Appalachian salt went on to an even larger boom in popularity when it was named the best salt in the world at the 1851 London World's Fair. Just as the Kanawha Valley was reaching its peak, the Kanawha River flooded in 1861. This, combined with the Civil War a few years later, crippled the industry, and by the end of the 1800s, Dickinson was the only salt furnace still in operation in the Kanawha salt industry. The Kanawha River runs through Charleston, West Virginia, and is one of the few places where humans have historically been able to access salt deposits to make Appalachian salt. As the city wanes and the hill countryside closes in, the Kanawha River takes you to a small former frontier community called Malden. Outside of Malden sits J.Q. Dickinson Salt Works, an infamous company of salt miners. Prior to the Civil War, the area around the Kanawha River produced more salt than anywhere else in the country. The land that J.Q. Dickinson sits on has been owned by the Bruns family for more than 200 years. William Dickinson moved to the area in 1813 with hopes of making Appalachian salt. Not only did he succeed, but J.Q. Dickinson became the largest and longest tenured salt company in the region. It produced salt for the country all the way through World War II, but was inactive for almost 70 years. In 2013, Nancy Bruns and her brother chose to revitalize the land and reanimate the once great salt company. They are now the last remaining salt makers in all of Appalachia. The Appalachian salt that J.Q. Dickinson harvests from the ground comes from an ancient body of water so old that it is considered primordial in nature. This body of water was once called the Iapetus Ocean, and it is older than the Atlantic Ocean. About 600 million to 400 million years ago, the Iapetus was situated in the southern hemisphere and is considered by many as the precursor to the Atlantic Ocean. As time passed and land masses moved, the Iapetus completely disappeared around the time the supercontinent Pangaea was formed. Today, West Virginia sits in the epicenter of what was considered the Iapetus Ocean. There are an unknown amount of salt deposits deep below the ground that can be accessed still today. The region surrounding the Kanawha River has, for a long time, supported humans' need for salt. Dating back to the Native Americans, It is proved that they used to make their own salt from the brine they found in the salt marshes along the river. Today, however, the process is a lot more commercialized and is centered around deep wells. Scientists say that there are salt deposits in the area that can reach more than a mile underground. But most of the salt used comes from much shallower wells, about 350 feet in depth. The massive wells are drilled until brine begins to fill them up. Then the brine can be brought up to the surface to be processed into Appalachian salt. You can get a 1-ounce jar of heirloom salt from J.Q. Dickinson for just $6. In a time where we're starting to experience a rebirth of tradition and simpler ways of living, it's nice to have a local option such as Appalachian salt, which has not only been named the best salt in the world, but is also a mineral that has been untouched by man.